Chapter 31. The Price of Abandonment. The room was suffocating with silence after Peter's revelation, the enormity of his words reverberating in the ears of every stunned family member present. Charlie stood frozen, his mind spinning. The man who lay unconscious just moments ago, whose stoic resolve Charlie had idolized for as long as he could remember, had just uttered the impossible. Finally, Charlie broke the silence, his voice weak, barely more than a whisper.
What did you just say?
Peter lowered his head briefly before meeting Charlie's gaze, steeling himself as he repeated the words that would forever change his son's world.
Kyle Dunning is your biological father.
The room stayed still as if the weight of that truth sucked all air from the space. No one breathed. No one dared to speak. Charlie's lip trembled, his hands shaking slightly as his mind tried to process the betrayal he felt, not from Peter, but from the broken truth now placed before him. It was Chris who finally broke the tension, his sharp, analytical voice cutting through like glass.
Wait, Uncle Peter, you mean that man, the one sitting in the interrogation room, is the one who abandoned Cousin Charlie when he was a baby?
Peter locked eyes with his nephew, and without hesitation answered.
Yes, he is.
Chris leaned back, his hands gripping the edge of the chair, his jaw tightening as he processed the barbaric irony of Dunning's presence now. Ruby's wide green eyes flicked between Peter and Charlie, the weight of the moment sinking into her, but for once, even she was without words. For Charlie, however, the quiet shattered inside him. All the raw emotion he'd been holding back, fear, betrayal, anger, grief, boiled to the surface. His face filled with anguish, but anger replaced the shock just as quickly. Without a word, he sprinted out of the room. Peter yelled, his voice cracking, half a cry, half a demand.
Charlie?
Peter swung his legs off the medical bed, ignoring the sharp protests of his body and the others in the room. Henry shouted, reaching out instinctively to stop him.
Peter, you can't.
But Peter wasn't listening. With legs like lead but determination pushing him forward, he chased after Charlie, refusing to let his son face the truth alone. Chris was the next to give chase, followed by Henry, while Ruby hesitated for just a moment before sprinting after them. Colonel Zeke, now leaning against the wall with his arms once again tightly crossed, was the first to break the silence that lingered in the room after Peter and the others bolted. His military mind, honed for decades to handle crises, was already assessing the situation as he spoke. He spoke gruffly, exhaling deeply.
Well, what just happened is exactly what it looked like.
He gestured vaguely toward the now empty hallway outside.
But we stay on mission.
Paul shook his head in disbelief, his tone worried.
How the hell do we deal with this? We're in the middle of a revolution, and now this family crisis drops right on top of us.
Zeke shrugged, his stoic demeanor masking any doubt.
Simple. We stay vigilant. The revolution doesn't stop for family drama.
Major Amma nodded, her expression hard like tempered steel.
It's not ideal, but Zeke is right. We maintain focus. That's how Peter would handle it.
Candy's eyes softened, still fixed on the doorway.
But how?
She asked quietly, clearly torn between her loyalty to her best friend Ruby and her newfound solidarity with Peter's mission.
How do we move forward when Peter, Chris, and Ruby, the leaders of this operation, are so distracted?
Zeke frowned, shifting his weight, but didn't hesitate to answer.
We start with the mission itself, specifically the next stage.
He paused briefly, his voice lowering as he prepared to drop the bombshell.
The military draft is about to be announced by the president within the next 24 hours.
The room fell deadly silent. No one moved. No one spoke. The full implications of Zeke's revelation seeped into the minds of everyone who remained. It was the calm before the storm. Charlie was out of breath by the time he reached the door to the interrogation room. His eyes locked immediately on the man inside, Kyle Dunning, tied to the chair, his bruised face twisting with discomfort. But when he heard the sound of the door, Dunning glanced up, and a slow, dark smile spread across his face. Peter entered first, then Charlie, followed by Henry. Ruby made a move to step forward, but Chris raised a hand, his voice low.
You wait here.
Ruby frowned, her frustration surfacing.
Chris, I'm fine. You don't have to keep babying me.
Chris shot back in a whisper harsher than his usual tone.
I don't care. Your presence in there might freak him out, and you don't need that right now, so stay out here.
Without waiting for a rebuttal, Chris turned and entered the interrogation room, locking the door behind him. Dunning's crooked smile darkened at the sight of Peter, his sarcasm already bubbling to the surface despite his injuries. He began to sneer.
Well, if it isn't the indestructible man who somehow collapsed like a house of cards.
But before Dunning could say more, his gaze shifted, landing squarely on Charlie. His smug grin faltered immediately, replaced by an expression of disbelief. Clearing his throat awkwardly, Dunning finally stood.
Charlie.
His voice dropped, hesitation laced with faint longing.
Son.
Charlie's jaw tightened as anger flared through him, boiling over into his words.
Don't,
he snapped, every syllable cut like a blade. Peter, Henry, and Chris stepped back instinctively, allowing the raw connection between father and son to fill the room without interference. Charlie took slow, deliberate steps toward Dunning. He hissed, his voice shaking with fury.
How dare you force your way into my life, into our lives, and jeopardize a mission that we've all sacrificed everything for?
Dunning raised a finger, pointing toward Peter.
That jerk is not your father, I am.
Charlie spat, arms flaring out in frustration.
Really? If you're my father, then where the hell have you been for the last 24 years?
Dunning faltered, caught off guard. Charlie pressed on, his voice ringing with clarity and pain.
For 12 of those years, it was Mom scraping by just to make sure I had food, clothes, and a warm bed. But in the next 12 years, it was him.
Charlie pointing directly at Peter.
It was him who stepped up. He's my dad, not you.
Dunning sighed deeply, his head falling slightly.
It was complicated, Charlie. When your mom got pregnant, I was fresh out of the police academy. I was young and stupid, and yeah, I freaked out. I didn't handle it right, and I ran.
Charlie shot back coldly.
That's just another way to say you're a coward.
Dunning winced.
You're right, I was a coward. If I could go back, I would never have left. But back then, I didn't have what it took to be the father you deserved.
Charlie, eyes filled with fury, turned to Peter as if to cement what he was about to say.
My mom fell in love with a real man,
he declared. Then he turned sharply to Dunning.
You're nothing to me. Kyle.
Peter teared up, not from pain, but from joy. Charlie slowly stepped toward him, his voice soft this time.
Dad?
But before he could continue, Peter pulled him into a tight hug and whispered to him.
You don't have to say another word.
From behind them, Kyle's bitter voice clawed its way into the air. His tone dripped with venom.
You'll all pay.
It was a low, simmering threat, but the chill in his words was enough to put everyone in the room on edge. He lifted his head and stared Peter down, his eyes alight with something dark and festering, rage, desperation, and a need to regain control of the moment. He scanned each face in the room, his bruised features twisting into a vicious smile, as if their disbelief and anger fed him. Peter stiffened at the sound, his protective instincts kicking in instantly. Henry's jaw tensed as he subtly shifted his weight forward, prepared to intervene if necessary, while Chris narrowed his eyes, his brilliant mind already churning with potential countermeasures. But it was Charlie who stood closest to Dunning, and his anger boiled over first. He didn't even turn back to look at him. His rising voice echoed with fury and disbelief.
For what? Cleaning up your mess? For taking care of the family you abandoned?
He spun on his heel to glare at Dunning directly.
You don't get to play the victim here, Kyle. You're just a bitter old coward who can't live with his own regrets.
Dunning flinched at the venom in Charlie's words, but he quickly replaced his wounded expression with another smirk.
Nice speech, kid. But I have a surprise for all of you. While you went on your little mission to the Pentagon, I'm the one who made the call to Metro PD and the military and told them the location of your command center. Every one of you, your little team of rebels, your genius family, they're all about to be wiped out, and it's because of me. Your little revolution is over.
The words hit the room like a hammer, silencing the Parsons for a moment as his ominous threat sank in. Chris was the first to speak after Dunning's twisted declaration. His tone was dangerously quiet, every word sharp as broken glass.
What did you just say?
He stepped toward Dunning, his cold blue eyes narrowing. Behind him, Henry exhaled deeply, aware of what was brewing in Chris, calculated rage, the kind that always led to unsettling results. Dunning leaned back weakly in his chair, resting his uninjured hand on the table. He sneered, locking eyes with Chris.
Oh, did I hit a nerve? Yeah, that's right. Metro PD and military forces are already in position, swarming outside your precious little command center. I told them everything. About your safe house, your operation, all of your little secrets.
His eyes flickered toward Peter and then back to Chris with dark satisfaction.
And here's the best part. Little Ruby, that smart-mouthed sister of yours, she's going straight to juvenile hall for what she did to me. Assault on a police officer is a very serious crime.
Chris stiffened, his expression darkening with each word, but Dunning wasn't done yet. He lowered his voice into a venomous whisper, laced with pure malice. Dunning continued, leaning forward as much as his restraints allowed.
Take it from me. She'll last a month at most in juvie before someone finds out who she is and takes her out. And she won't get a chance to be anyone's genius when she...
He didn't get to finish. With deliberate slowness, Chris reached into his left pants pocket, his measured movements betraying the chaos boiling just beneath his icy exterior. When his hand re-emerged, it held a switchblade. The click of the blade snapping into place was the only sound in the room, sharp and sinister, punctuating the tension like a gunshot. Peter's eyes widened, and he reached instinctively to stop his nephew, but Chris was already moving, his body radiating a level of intensity Peter hadn't seen in him before. Chris said coldly, his voice barely above a whisper, yet dripping with menace.
You just made a huge mistake.
Without a second thought, he lunged forward, grabbed Dunning's right hand, and slammed it against the metal table. In the same brutal motion, he drove the blade straight through Dunning's palm and into the table's surface, pinning his hand in place. Dunning's scream erupted through the room, a guttural sound of pure agony as blood spurted from the wound, pooling on the table. His face contorted in pain, his cocky countenance disintegrating in a flash. Chris leaned closer, his face unreadable, almost emotionless, except for the iciness in his pale blue eyes. His tone almost casual, as though pinning someone's hand to a table with a knife were just another mundane task.
Add that to our tab.
The room fell silent again, but this time it was shock that froze everyone in place. Peter, Henry, and Charlie stood motionless, as though trying to process what had just happened. For all his brilliance, even Henry seemed stunned at the severity of his son's actions. Peter took a slow, cautious step toward Chris, his voice measured but firm. He didn't scold him outright, but there was a warning in his tone.
Chris, we're better than this.
Chris replied flatly, his eyes still locked on Dunning, who was now hunched over in pain, his breath hitching as he tried to suppress another scream.
I'm aware, but threatening Ruby like that?
Chris tilted his head slightly, his calculating mind still coldly working through the situation.
He crossed a line.
Charlie, shifting his focus away from the gruesome scene before him, turned abruptly to Peter. His voice was serious and urgent, cutting through the heavy atmosphere.
Dad, if what he's saying about Metro PD and the military is true, we need to move. Now.
Peter nodded, immediately shifting into leadership mode despite the pain still lingering from his earlier collapse.
You're right,
he said, his voice gaining strength. He turned to Henry and Chris.
We've got to prepare for Code Red protocols. Let's move.
The three of them turned for the door. Peter grabbed Charlie by the shoulder as they moved past him, pulling him momentarily into a brisk side hug and whispered,
"We've got this. Stick with me."
Charlie gave a silent nod to his dad, already having his full trust and confidence. The door burst open, startling Ruby, who had been pacing just outside. She looked at the group with wide, curious eyes before glancing back toward the interrogation room where fresh screams could still be heard, her feisty personality creeping back into her tone.
What's with all the screaming?
Chris didn't break stride.
I stabbed him in his hand,
He said bluntly, not even looking her way. Ruby stopped mid-step, her mouth falling open in disbelief, looked back at the interrogation room and then back to her brother. Her voice carried equal parts disbelief and her trademark sass.
Wait, you're lecturing me about staying level-headed, and you went all psycho killer on him? Hypocrite much?
Chris ignored her as the group picked up their pace. Peter glanced back at Ruby, his expression serious.
"We don't have time for this right now. We have a much bigger problem to deal with."
As the team sprinted toward the command center, Peter barked quick orders to one of the analysts stationed nearby.
"Pull up the exterior security cameras. Show me everything."
The analyst quickly complied, his fingers flying over the keyboard. Within seconds, the large monitors lit up, displaying a live feed of the facility's surrounding area. What they saw made everyone's hearts sink. The perimeter of the building was swarmed by Metro PD officers, riot shields in hand, weapons drawn. Beyond them, an ominous line of military soldiers stood at the ready, outfitted with heavily armed vehicles and the kind of firepower that could decimate the facility in mere minutes. They were positioned for a coordinated assault, standing in disciplined silence, waiting for the order. Peter's face hardened as he grabbed the microphone connected to the intercom system. His voice boomed across the entire command center.
"Code Red protocol. This is not a drill. We are in Code Red."
The room shifted into chaos as alarms blared and everyone began running to their designated emergency stations. Ruby, Chris, Charlie, and Henry stood beside Peter, each taking in the severity of the situation. The revolution they had spent years building was now under siege. The team was outnumbered, outgunned, and surrounded. And yet, in Peter's steely gaze, there was no fear, only resolve.